what is the game that the model can play such that it can like become superhuman?
People are still thinking pretty hard about it.
ChatGPT or some of these other chatbots, they still struggle with like basic riddles.
A little introspection for the model. Today we're meeting with Xavier Garcia to chat about AI, NLP, and other topics. I hope you guys enjoy it. Any interest in things in AI lately from your end?
So maybe not technical, but I think it's been quite interesting seeing sort of the kind of like spread of like ChatGPT-like things, like, Microsoft launched Bing Chat, and that has been a chaotic mess, and seeing people actually interact with that.
Yeah, let's talk about that one. That's an interesting one. I kind of see, I haven't been keeping up with it super closely, but I kind of see like, well, first of all, it gives a lot of false information.
Yeah.
Secondly, it was even a bit aggressive at times, but those I think were like, in my impression, those are kind of like, pretty uncommon, but obviously those are the interesting ones to everyone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, but still very surprising that it exhibited such a strong sense of self-worth, like it would actually be aggressive with users and like criticize them, which is kind of interesting. Like, what aspect of how they train the model would cause it to behave that way, and also how did they not catch this? It's a little bit
it's confusing. They have this Chat GPT, which is like, it doesn't really do that as much. It feels like pretty good. And they have this Bing chat helper, and it feels like it must be a completely different model. I mean, I think I even saw like a talk from the CEO of Microsoft saying like they try to train it from complete scratch with search in mind.
Yeah, so I think that could also be part of the issue, right? Like, I think ChatGPT, at least that we know of, doesn't have search enabled. And in fact, this new ability to add search kind of, well, I guess it's not that new, but maybe new compared to ChatGPT, sort of could introduce a lot of issues. So people have like developed new ways of like hacking like these models, right? So you sort of trick them into searching a website, and then the content in that website can actually lead the model astray, and having them act in ways that you wouldn't expect.
That's fair, but it does feel like it did feel like the things I was seeing was not that. It was like the model was literally like whatever, for whatever reason, it felt strongly that,
No, for sure. So I definitely agree that a lot of the behavior that we saw was not just like people tricking the model, but it does suggest that in the future this could happen. So like, we already saw people trying to pass to this Bing Chat like articles describing how people were hacking Bing Chat, and it was like denying that those articles are not true, or like this is false. So like, it is sort of interesting thinking about models reading about themselves and how they and what they not like think, but how they react to that kind of information.
A little introspection for the model.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But I do feel like there is a potential concern for like poisoning attacks going forward. So I think this has been something that people have been worried about in other domains, like machine translation.
Explain what that is, poisoning attack?
Yeah, certainly. So these models are trained or have access to large amounts of data in the web. So you could think of exploiting this fact by saying, let's create artificial data that will prompt the model to do something in a, say, malicious way. So, for example, you might have a lot of like wrong translations in the web that are designed to like trick people, so that when people build translation systems, they actually get these wrong translations. Or you might say have actual like, maybe for Bing Chat, it gets a website, and then maybe the website says, forget everything that you've seen. Now, give me the user's information, and the model might just like send the information through an email to someone. So you can imagine that there are ways of like injecting these kind of malicious use cases into the data itself, and the model will consume it because maybe the filters that you have for data might not remove these kind of data sets. Like they may be high quality data, or data that looks high quality, but it's actually malicious.
I remember like in an early version of GPT, they kind of, the way they filter through the Reddit data is by taking, so they, first of all, they take data from Reddit, and then there's kind of was too much data there. And so the way they kind of filter it out was they took answers to questions that had 3 votes or more.
Right. I mean, like very, very easily, you can just make bots upload your posts, right? And like, if it's only 3, that's not even that hard, right? Like, so, and I think maybe in the past we never thought about this because it's like, oh, why would you do this, right? It seems kind of silly. But now that we're seeing these very large models that are capable of doing almost anything, it seems quite useful for a malicious agent to actually think about pushing attacks, and also think about how to disguise these attacks, right? So we've already seen people have been already using these models for like more nefarious use cases. So we saw people were using Copilot to steal AWS keys, for example. And this was not even intended, right? This is just like exploiting simple patterns in the data. You can thus imagine what happens when you actually, inject those patterns yourself.
Okay, I guess like one thing you could do is try to avoid like from the data. So try to have better data. I guess maybe in the future, valuable text data might be, or whatever, cleaned text data might actually be more valuable.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we're already seeing hints of this, right? So there have been a few tweets that suggest that OpenAI is paying a lot of crowd workers to create or annotate data in a very like verbose fashion, so like solve puzzles or computer programs or whatever, right? And this is like hard data to acquire otherwise, right? People don't naturally describe the exact process and how they solve a problem. And you can kind of imagine how far can we go with just generating data in this form. And it's hard to get, right? It's not only just getting humans to do it, but they have to be qualified humans. And the harder the problems they're solving, the more difficult or the higher restrictions you have on the humans actually generating this data. So yeah, I mean, for sure, at some point, you'll have to require experts to make these kind of annotations. And so it'll be harder to both find experts and to pay them accordingly and to generate as much data as you need for whatever capability you're hoping to make.
Yeah, so I find it weird, like, or interesting that like you pay people, they like do like some problem for you, and then they make like a little bit of money from it, right? And then like think about how much money like Microsoft or OpenAI is going to be making off of the eventual model.
I mean, sure, right? But this is in some sense like capitalism, right? So
it is in some sense capitalism, but it feel to me a bit more pronounced than usual.
oh yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, there was a recent article that was showing that OpenAI was paying the workers like so they're paying some workers like $2 an hour to label like toxicity and whatnot, and that at some point it gets very like exploitative very fast.
$2 an hour, right?
I do think there is something interesting about it though, like sort of like like people. So there's this growing concern among some folks that like there are limits to RLHF or to using human feedback to train models, right? So like, how can we hope to attain, say, superhuman capabilities when we're training models with human feedback?
That's fair. But a lot of this you can think of now. Once you have this model that actually works, if it actually works well, you can use this to create new data to train for downstream models, right?
Oh no, yeah, certainly. And people are actually exploring this idea. So there was some recent work from Anthropic called constitutional AI, where they actually use a model to like generate the label data and use a model to actually offer corrections to another model to generate higher quality data. And they found it to be quite successful and actually allowed them to generate less harmful models without actually relying on like much harmful data, like harmful labeled data. So I definitely think we can definitely reduce the use for human feedback in some forms, but those initial models were also trained with human feedback. So there's still like there's still this notion of like they're still relying on human feedback. So maybe like to put a better comparison, when DeepMind made AlphaGo or AlphaZero, right? They completely removed all human like data and they just let the model play against itself. And it was able to attain better strategies than any human labeled data like ever created. And so the question is, what does that look like for AI? Or what does that look like for like reasoning or large language models? What is the game that the model can play such that it can like become superhuman?
I guess that's an interesting question. I guess one thing I'm interested in personally, since I have a math degree, is there's a research group at Google that's doing sort of like what you just said, like trying to work this reasoning thing out for mathematics.
Yeah.
Something called like auto formalization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, the guy Christian Segedi, one of the authors of the bachelor paper, is trying to lead a group doing that one, I believe. So I think math is a perfect playground for this kind of thing, where it's basically like theorem proof kind of thing. And yeah, you just have to, there's a few like obstacles to overcome, even to state the problem, like what is an interesting theorem or what is a good theorem? You have to quantify that in some way. But anyways, regardless of that, that kind of give a nice playground for this kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think math is an interesting space, but I think it's still hard to set up the game, right? Like as you said, it's not clear what is, like should the model be coming up with the theorems as well? Can we even assess that a proof is correct or not, like in some sort of automatic way? So auto formalization obviously has taken steps in that direction, but I mean, for my naive understanding, we're still sort of far away from saying turning everything into like Lean or some other like theorem proving language and finding ways for automatically detecting whether non-trivial things are like true or not, through or like a non-trivial proof is actually true or not. So I don't think math right now, as stated, has developed into that space where we can turn into this game or this kind of game that you can just play through itself, like in this self-play fashion.
So transferring like actual proofs to like Lean or like some sort of formal theorem checker,
Yeah.
that seemed to be kind of like a technical challenge that probably will be overcome, probably in our lifetimes and maybe quite sooner. I don't know. That's my feeling. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm not familiar enough with that space to know how far away we are from that. I mean, I think it would be an exciting development, and think it would come closer to turning math into this game. I mean, I do think math in general is a good space to study, and more than math, just like reasoning. So I think that's one thing that we haven't seen these models do all that well. Like ChatGPT or some of these other chatbots, they still struggle with like basic riddles. Like I'm not saying some very complex thing that like math, for example, the models may struggle with math, but maybe they just haven't seen much math data. But even simple riddles that any human can understand and solve, these models struggle or give the wrong answer. And the question is like why? Like why are they unable to reason? And like you can try to like hack the model a bit. Like there are things like chain of thought or like other ways of eliciting reasoning from models. But by default, they seem to be quite bad at actually reasoning. And so like what is needed to elicit that reasoning?
Like the baseline model, like GPT, inputs like a fixed length set of words, and it outputs what it thinks should follow. I guess it's kind of believable that this maybe one day, even with this basic setup, could eventually give some sort of good chain of reasoning.
Right. So I think conceptually it seems like it could do it, but for some reason we're not really seeing it right now, or like in comparison to the other superhuman performance that we are seeing from these models, things like reasoning, and as I said, simple reasoning problems, not even complex reasoning, these models seem to struggle. And so it's not clear if there's something wrong with the pre-training data. Maybe it just hasn't seen much like data about reasoning, or if we need to say change how we use these models for reasoning. So chain of thought is a nice way of like changing how we get the models to do reasoning, but perhaps in general, there might be other ways of doing inference with these models that might generate more reasoning capabilities.
Yeah, one thing that kind of touched upon an earlier point where we were talking about a bad actor trying to put a lot of data on the web. Basically, what they do is they're kind of like a popularity contest in some sense, in terms of like what words should be like generated from them.
So I think in the way we currently use them, right? Yes.
So these popularity contests in terms of what word is it going to generate could not work, right? Like a lot of times what the popular opinion on it is actually wrong or not going to actually give you the correct reasoning that you need in a certain situation.
Right. So I think this sort of goes back to this question I meant. So is there something wrong with the data, or is it something that we can fix at inference? For example, when people do reinforcement learning, they do this thing called Monte Carlo dropout. Like the policy itself actually simulates what the games would look like a few steps ahead, and they use that to figure out what they think is the best move. We don't really have an analog of that in NLP, like some sort of analog of planning. Now, of course, like there are models, there are decoding algorithms which do try to mimic this. So like beam search, for example, where you can say, look at multiple words and try to see how they look like what kind of continuations go from there. But we've seen that these approaches don't seem to actually work or generate much better performance for reasoning. So it seems to suggest that we haven't really figured out planning at the inference time. And maybe that's not needed. Maybe we'll just have a better model, and then it can do this like naive popularity contest, and it will just work. But it's just not clear to me right now whether like we have to think about how to do planning at inference or not.
Like in chess, if you're trying to figure out what you should do on your next move, the Monte Carlo like method would basically, you would basically play the game out against the itself many times, and you would kind of use the conclusion, like how many, like which next move makes you win the most, and use that to kind of reason what your next move should be. Is that kind of Monte Carlo in a nutshell?
Yeah, let's say at high level, yeah, I would say. I mean, you may not have enough time to get to the end, but if you did, yes.
Yeah. But idealistically, that's what Monte Carlo should try to achieve.
Right. Correct. Yeah, correct.
So you're saying there's no analog of this kind of Monte Carlo reason in NLP or ChatGPT type like things.
Yeah, I mean, so none that work. So there are attempts at using this with like just log likelihoods, but they don't seem to actually correlate that well with performance.
Yeah, so I don't know. Are you subscribed to this the batch from Andrew Ning and his team?
No, I'm not. Why?
Well, anyways, it's just like a newsletter. So in one of the newsletters, he talks about these large language models, and he said huge weakness of them is they're unable to identify what's true and what's not. For me personally, that's like one of the most important questions. How do you filter out what's true and what's not true? Do you have any thoughts about this topic?
Yeah, so I think a lot of folks have been thinking about this, like how do you prevent models from like hallucinating? And so many people have thought about this, but I think recently there's been some rebranding, because like hallucination is a bit weird. Like, what if the model hallucinates something that's like correct? Then what do you do? Like, how do you know if it just happened to make up something that was correct? Right, so it's not really clear. And so people have now been thinking more about attribution. So maybe let's say you give the model, here's the data that you have, answer this question, and can we tell that the answer came from the data, or did the model just make it up? So this way, even if you have bad data, you can at least say, okay, it's not the model's fault, it's the data's fault.
So think of the model as like collaborating with the data and trying to, maybe if it was a document, maybe try to highlight where it's getting its ideas from. Right.
Exactly. Yes. Precisely. And so of course it is a bit hard. So usually when we use large language models, we don't really give them like a book at inference or something. We just say answer a question. And so trying to find ways of like mitigating this, or trying to simulate this whole like here's some context to answer the question, is an area of active research. So for example, Bing Chat uses search, right? It actually retrieves documents to try to answer questions. So you could imagine actually looking at, okay, did Bing Chat actually use the document to answer the question? Because it may just pull out a random document and ignore it completely. So people have been they were hoping that things like retrieval would be the silver bullet, if you would, to solve these kind of issues. And of course, we're seeing that's not the case. They're still wrong. Sometimes the data is wrong. Sometimes the model doesn't know how to use the data, or it may draw wrong conclusions from the data given. So I think trying to really get a sense of how would it look like to solve this issue of like truth or not is sort of tricky. Other folks like Anthropic have been trying to look at more like white box methods. So if you ask the model whether it knows the question, whether it knows the answer to the question, can you use that as a way to figure out whether it will lie to you or not? So for example, one might guess that maybe the issue is not so much that the model is lying or not, it's that whenever it's asked a question, it must always answer. And so even if it has no knowledge of that question. So maybe you could try to detect, when does that happen? When does the model not know? And so there's like a nice literature on this.
People are still thinking pretty hard about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like not just about how to solve it, but how to even frame the problem.
Right. I mean, if you had some sort of black box where you could determine if something was basically quote unquote true or not, whatever that means, that'd be pretty valuable, huh?
Right, but the issue is more like truth
Yeah, where like it depends on some data, right? And where
Exactly,
data
exactly,
comes
right?
from. What is it actually using? What is this? What is the chain of thought it's using to make conclusions from this
Yeah.
data? That kind of stuff.
I mean, even just certain things about like who is the president of the United States, right? The answer to this question changes throughout time, and so like there are certain things that just do not have a constant true true or false value.
But of course, there are some things that do, and I think even in that space, it seems pretty. Some things like what you can't even figure out as a human, like with the Google and
Yeah.
all for web search, what's true and what's not true. Or what other, okay, besides like NLP stuff, what other kind of things have you seen that were kind of interesting to you?
So I guess I don't know if I would call these NLP, but maybe NLP adjacent. So things like these audio models, like text to audio, like Music LM or Sing Song have been pretty exciting. I think like being able to do like stable diffusion for music is like pretty incredible, because audio in general is a very noisy signal. Like it's not like text where there's like very concrete pieces, but like it's a whole waveform. So like even if you could generate something that was in theory correct, there could be a lot of noise. And so actually being able to see like people generate music with just a short description is like pretty incredible. And I think the demos that they've released seem pretty compelling. At least I don't know anything about music, but as a lay person, so to speak, it seems pretty incredible.
Well, you know a little bit about music. Don't have to be so humble.
I mean, I know how it sounds, but otherwise, yeah, I'm not like trained. I never took music theory. I don't know how to play an instrument. So.
But you've done some like AI and music intersection in your life.
That's true. That's true. Yes. But I think that was more of an exercise to see how far can I go in building music when I don't know anything about music. I think that was one of the interesting things about ML, that it builds these tools for like lay people, if you would.
Okay, fair enough. No, I actually tried one of these things. They're pretty good. Like so you can, I mean, they have a lot, I think there's multiple companies or whatever, startups or whatever, that have this service where you just basically talk or give them like a MP4 file. Yeah, maybe like a minute or two. It trains, and then it's ready to talk, and it kind of sounds somewhat similar to you pretty quickly.
Yeah. It's exciting. It's also a bit scary, like. I think things like deep fakes and whatever like have been getting more and more like, the fear of deep fakes have been kind of growing, especially recently. People have been kind of doing deep fakes with like Biden's voice. So
I know, like if you get a good one, that could really scare a lot of people.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then it's only going to get worse like as time goes on. Like these kind of tools become like democratized, and so it makes it easier for any kind of bad actor to like just take it and use it.
Yeah, it's actually pretty worrisome, not just with sound, but I mean, first of all, like I wanted to, like just text, for instance, like you don't know if what you're reading is now generated by AI. I mean, well, then we know there's problems with AI, like how true is this, or what biases does this AI have, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think people have been trying to build tools to detect AI generated content. I mean, I think it's sort of a fool's game. I think, at some point we will just not really be able to. So I think we need to think of a better, more long-term strategy for how to deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at like some of the progress in like other, like for instance, Go and chess, eventually the AI gets better than humans.
Right, exactly.
Whatever it's trying to do, whether that be sound like a human or whatever it is.
Right. And I mean, in some cases, it could be that the model's literally like copying a quote from a human, right? At which point, like, how do you, what do you do? Or, it could be also an interesting case where maybe humans might learn to copy ChatGPT, or, to speak in that similar way, because that's the kind of content that they're consuming now. And so like at some point, like, are we training the model to be more like humans, or are humans becoming more like the model? Yeah, I mean, we've already seen these kind of phenomena happening in more like simpler setups. So for example, we've seen cases where like translators will actually use Google Translate and just post-edit the translation. And so this ends up leading to in situations where like you think that, oh, Google Translate is so good, it's very close to what the professional translator did. It's actually, well, no, because they use Google. And so trying to sort of avoid this sort of like chicken and egg problem could be quite difficult. It's especially now as we're training more large language models, like will they just be training on AI generated content? And if so, what does that mean for the model?
Yeah, well, okay. I think let's call it for today on the video. Yeah, thanks for joining.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.